For my project, I'm creating a memory plan for a violin piece called Sicillienne and Rigaudon. This is actually two different pieces, but I'm going to focus on the second half, the Rigaudon, for this project. Before starting to learn a piece, listen to it. This helps you learn how the melody sounds like, what the intervals between the notes are, and the rhythms of different parts of the piece, all before looking at the music. Listening to a piece serves as a form of priming, since reading the music becomes significantly easier after some exposure to it. Let's take a look at how this plays into the Atkinson-Triffin information processing model. The first stage of memory is sensory memory, which includes your iconic and echoic memory. The notes on the page are initially perceived as iconic memory, while the sound generated from playing is perceived as echoic memory. When you start to play, your echoic and iconic memory are simultaneously processed with parallel processing. They move into the second stage of the Atkinson-Triffin memory model, working memory, or what your brain is currently paying attention to. However, not all iconic memory moves into working memory, which becomes really obvious when reading a piece of music for the first time. Take a look at this piece, Don Juan. From the key signature to really high notes to a ton of accidentals literally everywhere, there's way too many pieces of information and too little time to move it all into working memory, so you end up forgetting and not being able to play most of it on the first try. Learning and memorizing this piece will require effortful processing. First, I'll mark the difficult spots in the piece that need extra practice. There are a couple ways to use elaborative rehearsal on these places to encode them in long-term memory as procedural memories. Take a look at Measure 12. One way to practice this is by using a technique called Galamian rhythms. To do this, you play the notes with 6 different rhythms. First, you start with long, short, long, short. Then vice versa, short, long, short, long. Then long, short, 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 and so on and so forth. After this, you run through the rhythms again, but starting with the bow in the opposite direction. This isolates the motions of the left hand from the bowings by the right hand, since they're all jumbled up, so that the notes themselves can be specifically practiced. Another way to practice this spot would be with an accelerando drill. Start with an extremely slow tempo so that all the notes are played correctly, and then increase this tempo by small increments until it's up to speed. With enough repetition, the bowings and notes become part of procedural memory. After learning the whole piece, I'm able to recognize it or play it if I'm looking at the music. This means the piece is in my long-term memory, but I still need to work on being able to recall it and play it entirely from memory. A helpful way to remember a piece is through chunking, or breaking it down into several different pieces. For example, the first 2 measures of Rigaudon are a phrase. It's repeated twice, so we'll label it as theme A. If you go through the rest of the piece like this, you'll see that it's made up of mostly 4 main phrases that are repeated, just in different keys. For example, phrase C first appears like this, and the second time like this. You can even take another step back and look at the order the phrases are organized in. For example, the first page of Rigaudon has the phrases in a pattern, A, B, C, B, D, B, and then ends with a repeat. The second page has a similar pattern, A, B, C, B, D, and then the piece ends with the phrases A and B. By first looking at the patterns of notes within phrases, and then looking at the pattern those phrases form, you create nested categories of musical ideas or a hierarchy which makes memorizing the piece easier. There are also more generic techniques I could use to memorize the piece. I could improve my long-term memory by using the testing effect, which would practice retrieval so it becomes easier. To do this, I can just practice playing the piece without looking at the music. I could also improve my memory of the piece with the spacing effect, where learning is improved when spread across a longer period of time instead of cramming it all in one night. I'll do this by starting to memorize my piece a week before the project is due. The majority of concepts I used in my memory plan worked pretty well since I ended up being able to memorize my piece. One thing that was really useful were the elaborative rehearsal techniques I used. I was actively practicing the notes rather than just repeating the same notes over and over again the same way. Chunking was also really helpful since it's not enough to just learn the notes, you also have to learn the order they go in. Having bigger phrases mean you have fewer things to remember in terms of what goes where. The spacing effect was also quite helpful since I definitely wouldn't have been able to learn the piece in one night. As you probably noticed in my recording, I stumbled a couple times. Although I did leave a week to learn the piece, having longer to practice would have improved how well I could have played it. This is because of long-term potentiation, a concept studied by Eric Kandel and Carl Lashley. The neural pathways I used to play the piece would have become more efficient because of myelination from using them so often. This would also help me learn the flow of the piece better, since although chunking was really helpful, I still had some trouble remembering those sections fluidly while playing them.